We finally have our answer as to who will make the Cowboys' 53-man roster and who will be cut as ESPN released their latest 53-man roster projections for every single team. And along with Trevon Diggs being moved to the active roster, we've got the latest Cowboys news and updates right here for you on Cowboys Digest. Welcome in, everybody. I'm Jace Andrews. We appreciate you joining us here today. Want to remind you to hit that subscribe button. It's 100% free, and we have been growing like crazy as of the past couple days. I believe we can hit 5,500 subscribers. We're about 130 away. I know there is a bunch of you watching this video right now that are not subscribed, so go down there and hit that subscribe button. It's 100% free. Let's get right into it and talk about the projections for the quarterbacks here, according to ESPN. They believe that it'll be Dak Prescott and Joe Milton III. Obviously, Will Grier is a point of content. That is mentioned in the article piece of this, saying, where's Will Grier, ? He's a vested veteran, so he won't go through waivers. The Cowboys can have an unspoken agreement with him to return to the practice squad, all while knowing he will be on the season opening roster against the Eagles. They did something similar with Cooper Rush a few years ago. Obviously, this is more of a, we can use a roster spot somewhere else, and maybe someone who can't get an IR spot or something like that, and then they can put him on the opening day, on the opening roster for the Eagles game to be that third quarterback in the line, kind of the emergency quarterback type. So that's really what I'm seeing there. I think that it's very nice to see Joe Milton have a better game against the Atlanta Falcons than he had really the entire first two preseason games. Obviously, he's got a bazooka arm, but can't really control it that much. However, liked the way he ran, liked the way he commanded the offense, and definitely looked a lot smoother out there. As for Will Grier, want him on the roster, but a roster spot can be used otherwise somewhere else, knowing that you can still keep Will Grier in a different aspect. We go to the running back room here with the 4 running backs that ESPN believes will make the roster, which this is an interesting one. They have Javonte Williams, which he is scheduled to be the RB1. But then here's the interesting part past that. It's Miles Sanders, Jaden Blue, and Hunter Lipke. Miles Sanders has been projected in a couple of different places to not make the 53-man roster. And in fact, he did not play in the final preseason game because he was, quote, banged up. Now, a lot of people during that preseason game were talking about how big it was for Miles Sanders to come out and produce. He ended up not even playing, and so in that aspect, I find it very curious that ESPN still believes he will make the 53-man roster when Phil Maffa is still out there. Now, here's what they say. Let's go to the article and kind of read this through. Williams enters the season as the lead back. We knew that. Blue's ankle injury sidelined him for 2 preseason games, but he showed promise in practice, and we know they like Jaden Blue. Sanders is likely on the bubble, but his experience got him the nod over rookie Phil Maffa, who can slide to the practice squad. That was kind of the point I tried to make in the last 53-man roster projection we made, was Phil Maffa being a rookie could go to the practice squad. I also mentioned Hunter Lipke. I know Hunter Lipke being a fullback and a very promising one. Probably would scooped off there, but I find it interesting at this point why they're going to even keep Miles Sanders if they believe more in Phil Maffa than Miles. It's a hard question to kind of open up the discussion to because Maffa, in my opinion, showed way more promise than Miles Sanders throughout the entire preseason, throughout training camp, throughout all of this. But at the same time, he is a rookie, so does that warrant him a roster spot over Miles Sanders when Maffa will most likely not be taken off by anybody else in the practice squad? It's a question for sure, but also something I do want to mention. This does seem like the end of Deuce Vaughn and the Cowboys organization, which I don't know if he'll make the practice squad. He might. Obviously, it was such a fantastic story. A Big 12 guy, Kansas State guy, his father in the organization got to call him and tell him, we're going to take you. And it just hasn't worked out. And maybe you can say it's because of its size. Maybe you can say it's just the way he was used. But ultimately, it's just an unfortunate situation that the Cowboys just have better running backs on their roster and guys who they believe in more than Deuce Vaughn. He had a couple of, good carries throughout his tenure and had a really good last preseason game. In fact, in my opinion, was one of the better backs we saw out there in the last preseason game against the Falcons. But it's just nothing was really going to be enough to get him on the roster because the Cowboys this season, instead of having one premier back or a couple premier backs, they've just got a host of guys who could be premier backs. And in that situation, Deuce Vaughn gets kind of kicked to the curb in that aspect. So it's unfortunate, but very good story. Sad to see him go for sure. We go to the wide receiver room now and talk about the 5 wide receivers that ESPN has projected to make the 53-man roster. some caveats to this one as well. CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, and Kevontae Turpin, they're an obvious 3. I think Jalen Tolbert could honestly be put in there, so the obvious 4. Past that, it was a big question of what they were going to do. They had Trayshawn Holmes. They've had Ryan Florina, who in ESPN's projection makes the roster. With Jonathan Mingo being on the IR, they have an extra roster spot, so obviously it's I think Holden and Flournoy were the 2 to kind of take that 5th spot. I had kind of an inkling that maybe they were going to take 6 instead of 5 receivers and get Flournoy and Holden, but in the last preseason game, it was definitely more, I don't know if it was the game plan or just the way Flournoy got open, but it was a lot more of a positive for Ryan Flournoy than rather Trayshawn Holden. So that is probably a big reason why the wide receiver room has Flournoy, not Holden. Now, in terms of what ESPN says, they say that Lamb Pickens give the Cowboys one of the best duos in the NFL. Turpin is the playmaker, but he can handle an expanded role, ? Jonathan Mingo will be open on injured reserve because of a knee sprain, so that might have saved Tolbert's spot, which is completely wrong, ESPN. If anything, Mingo being on injured reserve probably saved Ryan Flournoy's spot. I think Tolbert was, I honestly think he was a lock in my opinion, but that's just mine. I'm hopeful that Trayshawn Holden can be put on the practice squad. I do like him a lot still. I understand him not getting the nod here, especially for the last preseason game, not really going his way and going a little bit more towards Ryan Flournoy. But in the same aspect, I think Jonathan Mingo comes back and you might immediately put Flournoy on the practice squad. So it's an interesting situation, and Flournoy is going to have a little bit of time to prove himself and say that he is better than Jonathan Mingo. But when you make a trade for Mingo last year, the question mark is, are the Cowboys willing to, if he doesn't, if Flournoy works out, are they going to opt Mingo to the practice squad? That'll be a big question when that time does come around. Luckily, that's not going to be, at least for now. We go to the tight ends now. Jake Ferguson, Luke Shoemaker, Brevin Spanford, and Princeton Fant. Not really the surprise mark in terms of who made it. The question mark was more why 4 tight ends when I think Ferguson, Shoemaker, and Spanford could easily get this job done. And that's kind of what is said in the ESPN article when they say perhaps a tad heavy here with Fant, considering Lipke will get time at tight end as well. But Spanford missed preseason games because of a high ankle sprain. Ferguson's numbers should return to 2023 levels as he and Prescott have recovered from last season's injuries, which I'm a little bit more on the side that Ferguson is going to have a great year, like ESPN said. But at the same time, with that, I know that Spanford missed some games. Lipke, like they said, can play tight end, though. I don't think Princeton Fant has done enough to deserve a roster spot, especially when roster spots, 53 of them seems like a lot, but when you're carrying 90 guys and you're watching these guys play in 3 preseason games, it's actually a little bit less than you think, and I don't think Fant has done enough to warrant a roster spot. And maybe it's not even just him doing enough, maybe it's just the tight end room as a whole being so good from 1 to 3 that I don't think a 4th, especially in Fant, is necessary. However, we'll have to see. I know if you watched a couple videos back, Brian Schottenheimer basically said that there is going to be some guys who make the roster who you thought, I did not see him making it. He also said that the bigger one is there are guys on these 53-man roster projections that he's like, they're not going to make the roster. So we'll have some surprising things for us, obviously, on Tuesday, and we'll have a video on that, so make sure you stay tuned in for that and hit that subscribe button. But it's a definite question mark for Princeton Fant, I'd have to say. To the offensive line, we've had 10 guys over 11 guys. This one, ESPN goes with 9, which if Guyton is healthier than we think, probably a nice idea to go with 9. Tyler Guyton, Tyler Smith, Cooper Beebe, Tyler Booker, Terrence Steele, Nate Thomas, Hakeem Adeniji, Brock Hoffman, and TJ Bass. The one guy that they're missing, and they mentioned in the article down below, is Sadiq Charles. Here's kind of what they have said. Guyton's status for the opener is in question because of a broken bone suffered in his knee on July 28th, but he is increasing his rehab. Thomas would start off if Guyton can't go, and the Cowboys like what he has done this summer. Booker has looked the part for the first-rounder pick, and Sadiq Charles could be in the same boat as Greer as the Cowboys look for roster spots, knowing he will be available week 1. So there's a lot of caveats in this. That Sadiq Charles, you can pop him on there for week 1 and be okay with it. But when you're cutting down to 53, I thought Sadiq Charles was kind of a lock, especially when there wasn't really talk of him playing in that final preseason game. Nate Thomas really came in here and really showed out. I liked a lot what we saw from him in preseason and in training camp, so I'm excited to see him make the roster and probably play in that first week. And even if Tyler Guyton is ready to go, he's not going to be as healthy as you probably would like him. Here's the defensive line, and here's where they spend the most roster spots. They have 11 defensive line members, which is kind of what Jerry Jones talked about before the final preseason game. He said that there's a lot of talent, especially on the defensive edge group, and in that aspect, they're probably going to keep some guys that maybe or may not play as much, but they think is worth it. So it's Micah Parsons, Osa Odighizuwa, Solomon Thomas, Dante Fowler Jr., Marshawn Nealon, Donovan Ezraku, Sam Williams, Perion Winfrey, Jay Toia, Peyton Turner, and Mazi Smith does end up making the roster. Now, what's funny is all these guys 100% deserve to make the roster, but James Houston is also a guy that I believe could make this roster, and they mention him here. Parsons is included here, but will he suit it for week one? That's a big question mark, obviously, because we don't really know. Only he knows at this point. If he doesn't, then James Houston claims the final spot. Smith is firmly on the bubble, but the feeling is that the Cowboys will give him one more chance to live up to his first-round resume, which Mozzie, for better or for worse, had a decent final preseason game. His one takedown in the backfield, sack, whatever it was, he wasn't blocked. So am I going to say that Mazi Smith looked great out there? No, because in the times that he was able to reach the quarterback, reach the backfield, when you looked back at the play, he was not blocked at all. It was a miscommunication for the Atlanta Falcons rather than Mazi getting through a double team or getting through a player. That's kind of what I see in him. But at the same time, because he has a first-round pick, because of how much basically the Cowboys believed in him, he's going to be able to keep that roster spot. Going back to the cornerbacks room here, as I mentioned, Trevon Diggs officially today got moved from the PUP list to the active roster, so he will be included in the 53-man roster in this. They have Trevon Diggs, Deron Bland, Kaiir Elam, Zion Childress, Keeman Hall, and Andrew Booth. I love Zion Childress making this. It's great to see that UDFA again makes this roster, and we'll see in the safeties room. There's another guy who I believe should make this roster, and if he doesn't, we'll talk about it. But either way, we go into here in the article saying owner and general manager Jerry Jones hinted that Diggs might not be ready for the first game or two. In that case, by activating Diggs at the PUP list now, he could play in week 3, which we don't know. It seems like from Coach Brian Schottenheimer's comments, he could be ready for week 1, but either way, he's not on the PUP list, so he can play week 1. He'll have to be on the 53-man roster, but maybe he could miss the first 2 games for that reason. There is a spot for Siobhan Revel Jr., I believe Keeman Hall, Andrew Booth, and Zion Childress. I don't know who it would be, but I know when Siobhan does come back from that non-football injury list, which he's going to miss at least the first 4 weeks. I think, in my opinion, it might be Booth or Childress. I think Hall did enough to probably keep his roster spot no matter what happens, especially the way I saw him working in training camp. And the last game against the Falcons, I thought he performed very well. So for Siobhan Revel Jr., he's going to come back. He's going to take a spot. Right now, I couldn't tell you who. If Zion Childress doesn't play a lot, that kind of bodes well, bodes well, but kind of bodes that he will go away when Siobhan Revel. Now, I do think anybody who does go away will probably go into the practice squad at worst. And then the safeties. This is one where we talked about a lot, and there's one guy on here that I really wanted to be on here, but he's not. Malik Hooker, Donovan Wilson, Marquise Bell, and Juwania Thomas. I would have loved to see Elijah Clark on this. I think he 100% deserved a spot. I think he will for sure be on the practice squad if he doesn't make the roster, but you're carrying 4 safeties and you're carrying 11 defensive line guys. It's the give and take of what you're going to do with that aspect. Hooker played for Eberflus in Indianapolis before. He's been around the ball this summer. Wilson is a big hitter. And then Bell and Thomas are quality reserves and core special teamers, which that's a big thing. Special team is such a huge thing. Speaking of special team, here's the final 3 roster spots. Brandon Aubrey, Bryce Enger, Trent Sieg. CJ Godwin will be on the seasoning open roster against the Eagles. There's a couple of guys that obviously are special teams guys that will be on the roster. But yeah, as of right now, that is your 53-man roster projection from ESPN. Let me know in the comment section. Is there somebody that ESPN missed? Do you agree with me that Elijah Clark should be on the roster? Is there something that you believe got on the roster that shouldn't be? I want to know all your thoughts down in the comment section, but we appreciate you, and we'll see you next time here on Cowboys Digest. Peace out, guys.